Anthropic publishing the results of a study of like 4 million conversations with Claude and their surprising findings about translation. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Slate Repod episode 240. So, special episode today. We have Anna Wyndham, Slater's head of research, joining us, and of course, Esther, but both are located at the same office in London, our new London office. Hi, Esther. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Florian. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Florian. Hi, Esther. Hi, everyone.
There you go. So we're going to have to manage the audio a little bit because Esther and Anna are sitting in the same office, in the same room, and we're going to have to manage echo. But hey, that's what the tech is for. So we'll be back with guests soon, but we wanted to bring you up to speed on what's kind of been a torrent of news announcement, language AI announcement this week. So we're going to talk about Anthropic publishing the results of a study of like 4 million conversations with Claude and their surprising findings about translation. I'm just going to rattle through a bunch of language AI announcement. We're going to talk about LingoPal getting some money, TransPerfect buying in Switzerland, Meta launching a new language technology program, and briefly about Supertext's new, website and bold move. So, but first, stop everything you're doing now, except this podcast. And after that, go and head over to the Dwarkesh podcast. There's an episode with Jeff Dean and Noam Shazir from Google, both kind of 25-year veterans of Google. And there's like a segment, 5 minutes, on basically like one of the most seminal moments in language AI where the Google Translate team worked on deploying neural nets on machine translation back in 2007. So quick shout out at Dwarkesh podcast, one of my favorite podcasts out there. So go and listen to that. But now first, listen to us. And first to Anna talking about Anthropic and Claude. Very interesting piece of news and piece of research came out a couple of days ago.
Yeah, and as you said, there's an interesting finding here for the language industry. So this paper came out from, as you said, Anthropic, the AI lab, and it's called "Which Economic Tasks Are Performed with AI?" So what the researchers did was they analyzed over 4 million conversations, and they wanted to see how people are actually using AI in the workforce, and specifically using their AI chatbot, Claude. So they were looking at who's using AI and the tasks. And just as an aside, they said they're using a privacy-preserving system. And I didn't look into what that involves, but they've assured everyone that the privacy of the conversations was maintained. And they're doing this because what they want to do is to actually quantify and systematically look at how AI, or the evolving role of AI in the economy, and being able to identify how AI is impacting work both now and in the future. So there's a couple of main findings. The first is that the highest use for AI in tasks is by those in software engineering roles, analytical roles, and professionals who need substantial writing capabilities. And at this point, they don't call out translators. They mention technical writers and copywriters, but I imagine translation is included in that. And then they looked at how deeply people are actually using the task, so to what extent. And they found that around 36% of occupations show usage in at least a quarter of their tasks. And then they make this distinction. They look at people who are using the AI for what they call augmentative patterns, which means in a back and forth kind of collaborative interaction, versus those who are using the AI just to execute a task. And that task can have iterations, but the iterations are not a result of the person thinking and coming up with their own ideas in relation to the AI. It's more about just putting more data or more factual information from the environment into the AI. So in that case, they're looking at to what extent people use AI just to get things done without collaboration, if that makes sense. So the findings show that 57% of interactions are augmentative, so collaboration, and around 40% or 43% are automation focused, so performing the task directly. But the interesting part for the language industry comes in when we look more closely at these augmentative behaviors, the back and forth. So they classify 3 types. The first is when you're interacting with the AI in the iterative process of improvement. So you might say, please draft a marketing strategy for me. You look at the output and you say, okay, but now add some metrics. And that kind of interaction made up 30% of the data. Then they looked at acquiring knowledge and understanding. So asking questions, explain how machine translation works, for example, and that makes up about 23%. And then we have this final category, which is called validate and verify your work. And this is where you're interacting with the AI and you're saying something like, I've written this. Can you check the logic? Does this make sense? Can you find any errors? Can you suggest any improvements? And this made up 2.8% of the data set. But the interesting finding that we've been referring to is that almost the entirety of this category is concentrated to tasks discussing language translations. And keeping in mind, this is all data from a workplace context. So this is not people at home learning languages or so on. This is in a work situation performing work tasks. So we can see that, translators and people with a stake in the quality of translations are using AI for this purpose, for this validation purpose. And this validation capability of the AI is really being capitalized upon, it looks like, according to this data, almost exclusively by translators and those interested in translation, and very little by anyone else. So it's a kind of a surprising finding. And I guess it might be related to the fact that translators and those involved in the language industry already have very high adoption of AI. They're used to using it. And so this kind of use comes naturally. But I found it a little bit surprising that not more people are using AI for this validation function.
One thing is, I also find it surprising that not more people use it for this validation and verification, but then that almost that entire category is made up by people asking Claude to validate translation is I don't know what to do with this. So if you look at it, you have 3 million conversations, right? That's what it says. 3 million conversations.
4 million, I think.
Oh, 4 million. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do 4 million and then 3%. So it's 120,000. So it's roughly, you can say 100,000 conversations out of that sample of 4 million is related to people asking it to validate or verify translations. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Did not see that coming. Also, I wonder if the data would be the same for ChatGPT, which is much more consumer. I guess Claude is super business. I guess the average person wouldn't sign up to Anthropic and get a Claude account. It's more, it's probably more a business or kind of expert solution.
Definitely leans that way compared to ChatGPT. But I expect the researchers, as well as actually performing this research on this data set, this framework that they've developed is going to be used in the future as well. So I expect that they'll rerun the analysis on more data sets, and we should be able to get some more insights.
Yeah, I hope they keep that category, because if it's only 3%, maybe they're going to say, well, it was a good idea in theory, but now that we know it's only 3%, maybe we're going to kind of choose a different category. All right, well, so out of 4 million conversations with Claude, 100,000 were about asking if a translation is good, bad, or if there's anything to fix. So there you go. Very good. Thanks, Anna, for this. Quite a niche find out of that 40, 50 page paper that Anthropic published. Now, before we go into a little bit of fundraising, I just want to rattle through a few announcements that came out this week in terms of language AI announcement. I guess the biggest one was the YouTube CEO, Neil Mohan, calling AI dubbing one of their big bets for 2025. So they published YouTube CEO published a post, a few hundred words. Actually, it's probably more than a few hundred words, probably 2,000 or 3,000 words. It's an 8-minute read. And then one category they highlighted for 2025 was AI dubbing. So saying that for videos with dubbed audio, more than 40% of the total watch time comes from viewers choosing to listen in a dubbed language. That's an interesting data point. We've spoken about this many times now, that you have this kind of Netflix-like language selection on YouTube that they're rolling out, initially only for the Mr. Beasts, now for kind of bigger creators, and maybe it's going to come down further to smaller accounts as well. But yeah, staggering data point there, that 40% of the total watch time for videos that have dubbed audio selection is now coming from people that are listening to the dub version. Human in the loop or not. Now, this is coming. I saw it on a video. There's this football or whatever soccer show online that's called Find the Pro. It's from Germany, and it's basically like 8, I don't know, 8 people playing football in front of like a panel of judges, and the panel has to figure out who's the pro, who's the professional. And it's super popular. It gets like between 500,000 and 1 million views per episode. All the kids watch it. And they used to do it. I mean, most of the episodes are located in Germany, but now they went to Liverpool and had had kind of a Liverpool leg of the show. And this was the first time they recorded it in English, but then they actually used literally the AI dubbing to kind of dub it back into German. Now you cannot watch it. It makes barely any sense in German. It's like, because it's super jargony. It's very kind of stop and go, false starts, false stops, very conversational. So it's very, very hard to listen to in German. But, that creator didn't mind putting it online. So this is getting very broad adoption right now. Now, a company that's also hoping for broad adoption in a similar space is probably DeepGram. We had the CEO on the podcast a couple of years ago. They announced a new speech-to-text model called Nova 3. They're saying they're pushing the boundary of AI-driven transcription, all kinds of self-customization and flexible plans, challenging audio environments, etc. So this is more for the probably kind of government, super enterprise level use for speech text, right? It's not like you're in a studio and you're recording on a Shure mic, but maybe there's a lot of audio that's getting recorded in other environments, and that also needs transcription. Now, our friends over at Pangaea, they launched a solution called Pod Pro let me just go to the press release briefly, that helps with localization with AI-powered multilingual sync for creators, publishers, and their agencies. So another solution for having this podcast dubbed into in multiple languages. And then there's another one, a launch by, I don't even know what the company's called, but it's called KSCC2 series, a two-way speech-to-text AI translator that's actually available as kind of an actual unit and on a touch screen. So it's one of those translation devices. Incredible that stuff's still out there in 2025. But we picked that up this week. And then one thing before I close here is Adobe Firefly. So we've talked, it's Adobe's kind of Gen AI solution that you're almost naturally subscribed if you have an Adobe Pro account. So they launched now a much broader set of video capabilities. We here also got access to it, and you now can do translation too. So similar to the 11 Labs test and HappyScribe test that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So same thing. I uploaded it, a 5-minute segment of SlaterPod. I think it was Esther, was our last, most recent episode. And here's the judgment. So the voices are not quite as good as 11 Labs. And actually, with you, Esther, it kind of has a fairly good voice initially, but then it falls off the rails, and it basically just reverts back to one of those standard voices. Have you had a chance to look at it?
No,
Okay.
I must. I'm going to check it out now you've said that.
Yeah, sorry, we're so fast with this. This is coming out so quickly, so we don't even have to check. We can't even check the results here. But yeah, basically, it's like 2 minutes. It's like properly voice cloned, and then it kind of reverts back to one of those stock voices, which just sounds like, okay, that's just the usual kind of AI voice. Same thing. It's not voiceover style, no lip sync. Also, it doesn't seem super cheap. I almost ran out of my credits after doing a 3 to 5 minute, I think it was about 4 minute, that video. I ran out of my generative credits on Adobe. So I'm not sure what would happen if I uploaded a 60-minute podcast. Look, the TLDR, I mean, this is getting so incredibly competitive right now. This being kind of just AI dubbing, multimodal conversion of everything. I mean, Adobe's rolling this out. There's, dozens of others that are rolling this out as well. So this will be interesting how this shakes out in the next, 2 to 3 years, I would say. Not 2 to 3 months, but 2 to 3 years. Is it going to be a winner takes all? Is it going to be a very dynamic, very competitive environment? And what's going to be the differentiator here? And just one more non kind of AI dubbing related launch announcement. That's more in the kind of the broader enterprise localization space is Scientific. I think they're a spin-off originally of Pectera, that kind of big enterprise localization company. They launched something called Flow this week. And it seems to be, without having done a ton of analysis, kind of competing with the, We Localize Opal, Accolade Leah, RWS Evolve, Lionbridge Aurora. So all these big kind of enterprise-grade localization companies are now launching these integrated AI solutions. So this is another launch that we came across only this week. And Esther, you came across a funding round that I don't think we've even covered it yet because it broke this morning at the time we're recording this.
Well, I thought initially it was a typo because there's another company with a very similar name that we are aware of. But this is news that LingoPal has raised $14 million in a Series A funding round. Series A funding, it was led by DCM Ventures, which is a Silicon Valley VC venture capital firm, participation from a number of others, including Scrum Ventures, Marquee Ventures, and some prominent angel investors, they said. In terms of what it is, it kind of follows on quite nicely from some of the topics that we've just been discussing there. So LingoPal is a real-time speech-to-speech translation solution. It was launched back in 2023, so not too long ago. The founders are two guys who have backgrounds coming from Microsoft and Tesla. And they've developed speech-to-speech engines, which they say have incredibly low latency and very high accuracy. So apparently their smallest model has latency of sort of 2 seconds or something, I believe they said. In terms of what they're looking to do or what kind of use cases I think they're focusing on, I was reading in the press release a little bit earlier, but they're saying, for one thing, the area of sports. So like the sports industry is a really good or interesting use case for them. I guess taking one step back, essentially this is designed for broadcasting in multiple languages. So you've got the platform, which provides a no-code plug-and-play solution. So this sort of simple solution whereby any live stream, so the audio of any live stream can be translated into they say more than 120 languages.
We're not doing it under a 3-digit number of languages. 120, sure. Okay.
120, exactly. So I think essentially take any kind of, like URL or stream, live stream, and they can then put their solution on top of it and, throw out any number of 120 languages.
Doesn't this seem kind of AI media? I mean, AI media is obviously in the captioning and kind of live broadcasting.
Media,
but I mean,
yeah.
if these technologies all become so much more accessible, then a company like AI Media, which is super embedded in this space, might have a better shot than if you do it from scratch. Not sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's almost like it's a tough industry to crack, for one thing. They're talking about having this hypothesis that essentially it's difficult to communicate or difficult for businesses to communicate with global audiences. They kind of go into a bit of deeper hypothesis here that translators or human translators cost a lot of money. Therefore, there's a high barrier to entry. And also, it's incredibly impractical to rely on humans when you're dealing essentially with like a 24/7 content feed, for example. So they say they saw a gap in the market for that. Which is, this sort of simple solution that allows you essentially to broadcast in multiple languages. It's focusing initially at least on the sports industry because they say that's sort of super popular for live streaming. They're aiming at, I think, coupled with the kind of broadcasting focus, they say that their solution is able to do things like preserve emotion, understand nuanced things like slang, idioms, and they already have some customers, presumably some traction among global sports properties, they said, high-profile rights holders, and also media networks. So that seems to be the area of focus for them for the moment.
Okay, there's a lot of demand for sports, but think about it. I mean, like when I watch, like, I don't know, best goals Ronaldo or something, and then I don't mind if it's like an Arabic commentary.
But it's the thing you were just complaining about Find the Pro,
Yeah.
and that Find the Pro was really bad in German, for example. Like maybe this is something along those
But that's
lines.
a highly produced YouTube show, right? That's a highly produced
right.
YouTube show. So if like and there the talking matters a lot because it's the panel judging the players. So the kind of the audio is almost as critical as the actual thing you're watching. But if you're watching, I don't know, Ronaldo's top 10 goals in the past Saudi season, then like, do I care about the commentator? And then if it's live, I mean, I can live with like a non-German commentary or something. Anyway, yeah. So good luck to LingoPal. Put those 14 million to good use. Maybe Anna, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, what do you think about something like this? Too niche? Does it make sense?
I was thinking that it's interesting that the use cases for language AI generally are bringing up these different hotspots for use than what we've seen in traditional language industry. So sports is popping up. We've got content creators. We've got these use cases for AI dubbing in education and so on. So as to whether they represent a huge opportunity, there's a bit of a question mark. But I do think it's interesting that that we're seeing this kind of proliferation of new types of content where AI solutions are kind of the quick and easy, and sometimes the best option for the use case.
100%. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this just wouldn't ever get translated or localized or adjusted anyway. So maybe just that kind of language overlay, and over time it gets better and better. And in 5 years, it's just going to be very natural.
I was going to add as well, in terms of what Anna's saying about these, hotspots and stuff. It's super interesting that maybe this is natural, but, you have these use cases or these startups coming with really niche use cases. If you think about, they're not catering to every single possible use case for AI dubbing. So you've got this sort of like natural fragmentation or within the startup landscapes, with people focusing on super, super niche potential problems. And then, to your point, Florian, as to where it's all going to lead, like, is there going to be some sort of like market winner? It'll be interesting to see how it kind of shakes out.
I do want to go back and talk about football, please, if I may. So I think it's an interesting example, though, for cultural aspects of it as well. I mean, think about the kind of the average Spanish or maybe like South American football commentator, or maybe Italian. That just basically, it's a constant stream of words. And then occasionally, if there's a goal, like has this like insane, like, 15 seconds goal, scream, shout thing. And then you contrast that to like kind of a German commentator where it's like, once every 30 seconds that would say just that call out a player's name and just kind of keep it going that way. So, I mean, sure, you could theoretically translate it or dub it, but it's just that the style would make absolutely no sense to the other culture. So AI couldn't help there.
The tone is different as well. I know, I think it's a Voiceseed who does tone transcreation. So they look at what does it mean, for example, when, say, a Spanish commentator has a very high-pitched tone, does that mean they're excited? And then they'll look at the equivalent tone in different cultures and languages and aim to make those adjustments.
Man, that is frontier. All right. Well, there's got to be something left for us humans to adjust, and and let's keep those cultures alive. Otherwise, we're all kind of blending into this blob. Okay, back to familiar shores. Feels warm and fuzzy to talk about TransPerfect buying Apostroph. The world's largest LSP, acquiring one of Switzerland's largest LSPs. Esther, tell us more.
Yeah, well, it's very, very close to home for you,
Yep.
Florian.
It's just down the road, basically.
Sitting in your office in Zurich. Yeah, so this was news that we covered this week, that TransPerfect acquired Apostroph Group. The company has existing presence in Switzerland and Germany, so being one of the sort of main leading providers in Switzerland and Germany. Apostroph, prior to the acquisition, had private equity owners, ECM Equity Capital Management. They were backed by ECM since, I think, 2016. Company went on to do sort of acquisitions within the region. So they did some of the latest acquisitions would include USG in 2020 and Global Translations in 2020, and then a company called Marco Gehring Communications in 2022. So yeah, Apostrophe itself, no stranger to acquisitions, has now been acquired, as you rightly said, by the largest language service provider globally. We had a couple of comments from TransPerfect's co-CEO and president, Phil Shaw, who said, talking about sort of the rationale behind the acquisition, saying, Apostrophe has managed to develop one of the leading brands within the DACH region. So that's obviously of interest to them. They also explained that TransPerfect is going to be taking on all of Apostrophe's employees as part of the deal. And that includes 9 offices across the region in addition to TransPerfect's current office presence, which are in the region in Berlin, Munich, and Zurich, where they have been present since, I believe, 2010 or so. Phil Shaw also shared a little bit about his take and their view on the market for translation localization in Switzerland. He said customers demand very high quality and also the utmost in data privacy and security. So that we got quality, privacy, security. And he was saying that obviously they want to build on what Apostrophe has developed and done in terms of infrastructure and compliance to expand that within the DACH region. And apparently the plan is for Apostrophe to operate as a division of TransPerfect for the moment and maintaining, they said, its own brand for the immediate future.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It does put TransPerfect much more on the map in Switzerland. They've been here for a long time. I think they opened Geneva like in the mid-2000s and then Zurich in 2010. Always been here. But with this one, they're going kind of super local on a lot of the local, Zurich, Basel, Geneva accounts. So interesting acquisition there. I mean, the DACH basically means like Deutschland, Austria, and Switzerland, but like there's not much Austria in this. I think it's mostly
there's not much.
Actually, the whole acronym makes no sense. I mean, it's like Austria is the English
sandwich.
Well, it's Austria's English, Deutschland is German, and then CH is like kind of Switzerland's, Latin acronym. So anyway, DACH. But DCH is a little tough. All right. Hey, if you have 10 hours of speech recordings with transcriptions or more than 200 sentences of written text along with translated sentences in a very low resource languages, you know what you can do? You can give it all to Facebook, no, to Meta, because they launched a language technology partner program to improve its open source language technologies. It's open source, especially for AI translation. The entity or the team that's asking for this is the FAIR team at Meta. And now you're saying, hey, I know FAIR team. It's the Facebook AI research team. But no. It's no longer the Facebook AI research team. It's the fundamental AI research team at Meta. So they even rebranded the term FAIR, got rid of the Facebook, which serves underserved languages. And it aligns, they say, with UNESCO's International Decade of Indigenous Languages. So yeah, they need all kinds of data. Initial example they gave was the government of Nunavut in Canada is sharing data in Inuktitut, which I remember from previous podcasts, and Inuinnaqtun. I'm horribly mispronouncing, I'm sure. But so basically, yeah, they're just building up more low resource language resources. Put it online. I think part of it is actually hosted on Hugging Face. They are also launching a new benchmark called Bouquet, which we're going to be writing about. And the whole thing is part of this push with this massively multilingual speech program, the Seamless M4T that they published. I think it got even coverage in Nature. And, generally Meta's vision is speech translation being completely seamless across all of the languages, because they don't just care about, the major high-resourced languages in Europe and the US, but also, of course, all the others where all the 3 billion people that are on Meta's platforms hang out. So I don't know, Anna, do you have any thoughts on this? It's a little hard to kind of summarize the whole thing.
Well, I think it's interesting to see, or it's good to see Meta following through on this kind of special interest it has in low resource languages. So they announced the No Language Left Behind project in 2022. And it really is a focus of theirs, more so than I think, say, OpenAI or some of the other major AI labs. And I suppose that they can call for contributions because there's a huge interest in preserving these languages. So I guess that's where the motivation would come from for these partners to step up and contribute their speech recordings. But I'm interested that they want 10 hours of speech recordings with transcriptions. And I'm wondering, are they thinking of automated transcriptions? Do they want high quality transcriptions? It would be interesting to see exactly kind of how much work is involved in putting together that kind of data and the kind of quality expected, because this data collection would or could have otherwise gone to one of those big data for AI companies, Scale AI, Appen, and so on. Like, this is kind of perfectly in their niche. That's what they offer, and it's their special, their differentiator, that they're able to provide speech recordings for low resource languages. So it's interesting they've gone for the contributor route, but I think it kind of speaks to this position where we're in at the moment, where companies need to be creative in how they collect their data. We see like 11 labs asking for people to donate their voice, for example, I think in exchange for credits. I can't remember, but lots of different methods of bringing data in for the purpose of training these models.
Yeah, you're right that some of this could have gone to these data for AI providers. But here, I'm looking at the original post. It does say we are looking for partners who can contribute 10 hours of speech recordings with transcriptions. Cool. Moving on. Final quick topic for today. So Supertext, shots fired with DeepL. So what did Supertext do? Remember, Supertext and TextShuttle merged. TextShuttle, basically AI translation, machine translation company. Supertext, historically, very kind of creative translation, transcreation, copywriting company. Then became actually quite a sizable LSP based in Zurich, like Apostrophe, so key competitor of Apostrophe. So they merged, and then now Samuel Leubli, the TextShuttle CEO, is now leading the combined company, and they're just moving everything onto the Supertext domain. So supertext.com is the new domain now, and if you go to TextShuttle, it's kind of rerouting it. So they're rebranded into Supertext, no more TextShuttle. Now, the main landing page of the combined company is now basically, if you go there, the landing page is just kind of an AI translation interface, like Google Translate or DeepL. So you have to kind of, the agency business is a couple of clicks away, but the agency business arguably still contributes a big proportion of the revenue. And to give the whole relaunch a bit of, I don't know, virality, I guess, cloud virality. They actually did a research paper comparing Supertext's machine translation or AI translation with DeepL's, like a research paper that literally the only purpose of the research paper is compare Supertext to DeepL. And sure, it's probably marginally biased if you publish it, but key takeaways, according to a post by the Supertext CEO: sentence level comparison, no strong preference by the evaluator. So they say they did a blind evaluation by professional translators. So sentence level, no strong preference between DeepL and Supertext. Document level, Supertext wins 3 out of 4 because the translator said apparently more consistent terminology, better context retention, fewer contradictions across long form text. Well, congratulations on this, and congrats on the launch, particularly to Supertext kind of combining all of this into one coherent company, and the bold move of putting the AI interface, the machine translation interface, as the landing page for the whole company. That's quite an interesting move. All right, Esther, Anna, thanks so much for dialing in today from London. Anna, you're heading back to Madrid today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
All right, cool. Okay, maybe back with a guest episode next week or the week after. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thanks, everyone.